Could we see a multiplayer trade between the Montreal Canadiens and the Edmonton Oilers? There's numerous players on both sides that seem to have interest in each team. We'll talk about how that might be able to work out. Plus, we have numerous NHL suspensions to discuss here today. Lots of action causing illegal play, causing players to get in trouble with player safety. Plus, Letang returns. We have some changes in the Calgary lineup I want to discuss. And Kevin Bieksa has had a good rant about Chara's comments on Hockey Night in Canada. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. Of course, lately you've been seeing a lot of videos I've been recording on the road as we travel through the family vacation. The last number of days been through the Disney World Resort in Orlando, Florida. Now we're at Universal Studios, and once again are in the Orlando area. So obviously different backdrop, different setting here. So hopefully you enjoy the little unique scenery here from the hotel room. So for today's video, we'll start with the suspensions. We've got three. Actually, there was one that came in late yesterday, which I hadn't heard of before I recorded yesterday's video, and that's Pierre Engvall of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Although I wasn't surprised to find out, given the fact that I had seen the play that occurred in the Leafs and LA Kings game in the Toronto Arena, where Engvall came down basically right on the back of the head with his stick on defenseman Sean Durzi. It was a pretty dirty play, in my opinion. NHL player safety said essentially that it's the definition of high sticking. Ultimately, you know, Engvall has to be in better control of his stick. I've seen some Leaf fans complaining about the suspension online and disagreeing with it, which you're certainly entitled to your opinion. But at the same time, I think that you know, regardless of what you think, because Durzi wasn't hurt, it was still a dangerous play, and he needs to be in control of a stick, and it's just that simple. You can't be whacking people in the head, especially coming down from the top on the back of the head and neck area. That was pretty dangerous. So he gets a one-game suspension. We saw Jeff Skinner, the Buffalo Sabres, absolutely lose his mind on Jake Guentzel, the Penguins. After the play went to the net, Guentzel made very slight contact with goalie Craig Anderson, and Skinner didn't like it, which I understand. That happens a lot. You sometimes get a little bit of a skirmish after the whistle sometimes if there's a digging at the, you know, the goalie's glove or the pads or anything of that nature, if there's any minor contact. Pretty common thing, but then it really escalated, and Skinner just absolutely lost his mind, and they started slashing each other, and then Skinner took it a step further and cross-checked Guentzel right in the face. So he gets 3 games for his actions against winger Jake Guentzel. So Skinner will be out of action for tonight and the next 2 games on top of that. And Seattle Kraken defenseman Jamie Oleksiak also getting a 3-game suspension as well for an illegal check to the head to Capitals defenseman Alex Alexiev. Now, of course, in that case, when you watch the replay, NHL player safety basically said it is the absolute definition on multiple points here of the illegal check to the head. The head was the focal point of contact. They felt that Oleksiak could have avoided the contact, taken a different path, and you know, avoided the hit being the way it was delivered. So certainly some actions there that generating some player safety, you know, interventions, you could say. It's not something you've seen. Multiple of these players were given match penalties during the games, which isn't something that you typically see handed out very often. So obviously some rough days there in the NHL action, and we'll see as the season goes on, that kind of activity tends to pick up as teams get a little bit more heated, working towards their eventual playoff push. Onto some NHL injury and roster updates. The Calgary Flames finally at Matthew Phillips. Of course, after calling him up the other day, he's in the lineup tonight against the Maple Leafs, and they did scratch Milan Lucic. So Lucic is the healthy scratch that comes out of the lineup to get Phillips in the game. As I record this video, it's in the second period, a 2-2 tie game between Toronto and Calgary. At this point, I mean, I've seen some already talking. There's already speculation out there about Lucic maybe being traded. I'm not going to go that far to say that one healthy scratch is going to lead to that. Ultimately, Lucic's name had been out there in the offseason before, wondering if Calgary might look to move on from him in order to bring in more of a different kind of player, you could say, if they were able to, but not going to be easy. But thankfully, I guess in the case of Lucic, he's in the final year of his deal, but he does have some trade control. So if they ever want to go down that road, it's not going to be an easy deal. But when they picked him up, he had to waive then as well to go to the Flames. And I don't know, I still see him as being a Daryl Sutter type of player, but I know Sutter's been frustrated with his team as of late. When they played the Columbus Blue Jackets the other night, things did not go well at all. Sutter made comments that some of the players showed up for a visit, meaning to visit former teammate and friend Johnny Gaudreau, and not play to win a hockey game. And Mackenzie Weegar had a terrible game himself and actually took a lot of ownership for it after the game as well, calling himself out, saying how terrible he played as well. So we'll see if the Flames can get a better result tonight, and whether or not Matthew Phillips sticks in the lineup, or if this is just a one game thing for Lucic, or is this going to lead to more speculation if he's not going to be in the regular lineup? It's only one game so far. It's a little bit early to talk about that. But in that game as well, we also saw the Maple Leafs Mitch Marner continue his goal streak, or his point streak now. It's up to 21 games. He did get another point already. The game is still going, as I mentioned. It could be others, but for right now, he's at least one. So the streak continues, and it's now at 21 games, which is mightily impressive. Now, of course, the other big news today as well when it comes to injuries and such was the Pittsburgh Penguins are getting Chris Letang back tonight. He's in the lineup after only missing 12 days of action after he was reportedly diagnosed with having a stroke. So, of course, when that first happened, we knew he was out indefinitely. They were going to run a barrage of testing and to kind of figure things out, make sure things were safe for him before they get him back on the ice. And last time this happened for him back in 2014, he was out a couple of months. So the fact that he's back so quickly is obviously very positive. We'll see where this goes from here. But obviously nice to see Chris Letang back and not missing too much time. Certainly kind of shows it was likely a mild scenario there. Hopefully he can continue playing and not have further complications from whatever was causing that to happen. That's a scary situation, and he's, like I said, he's dealt with it before as well, so I know he's used to the symptoms and how he feels and what he's going through, but certainly you hate to see anything like that happen, and hopefully he can stay healthy and continue playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Another injury as well with the Ottawa Senators missing today, Matthew Joseph. He's out of the lineup now for a couple of weeks with a lower body injury. He was hurt in a previous game where they had the overtime loss against the Dallas Stars. And actually, speaking of suspension, I know a lot of people are more of a joke than anything else, but in a situation of what you call friendly fire, defenseman Thomas Chabot went to the bench after what you could say he was unhappy with a non-call on the ice, so he got hit in a way that he thought should have been a penalty against their opponent today, the Nashville Predators. He was really heated and went to slam his stick, and instead of getting the bench or whatever he was thinking he was going for, he ended up getting teammate Travis Hamonic in the face. So certainly a pretty nasty situation. You don't usually see teammates slashing each other in the face like that. Certainly, purely accident. You could tell immediately as soon as it happened. He felt terrible, was checking on him if he was all right. Hamonic was able to continue playing, but I would dare say Thomas Chabot owes him a little bit something to say sorry. So I'm thinking maybe a couple of nice steak dinners or something might be what's in order to make up for that. That's not something you see very often. Certainly, Chabot's one of the leaders on that team, and certainly somebody that's out of character for it to even really to be that upset and to kind of contain his emotions. But it goes to show you that sometimes if you react and you don't react properly, that sometimes unintentional things can happen and lead to mistakes that you're going to regret. So certainly you got to try to channel your emotions to make sure something like that doesn't happen. We had a signing today as well. The Vegas Golden Knights have signed one of their prospects, a 4th-round pick from the 2021 NHL draft. And that's Jacob Berbanek. Obviously he's a centerman from the Czech Republic, now playing in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League for the Charlottetown Islanders, having a pretty good season. And he gets himself his 3-year entry-level contract and officially gets on the organizational roster here for the Vegas Golden Knights. So good on him. He's having a pretty good year in Charlottetown. Nice to see him get rewarded with this contract not too long after being drafted. Now, as expected, and as I mentioned, we saw a pretty good rant earlier this evening from Kevin Bieksa on Hockey Night in Canada. Of course, Kevin Bieksa, longtime NHL defenseman. Most of his career played with the Vancouver Canucks. Played a little bit with the Anaheim Ducks at the end of it, but for the most part, he's known as a Canuck. Recently signed a one-day contract with Vancouver and officially retired there. And, of course, they honored him and had a little ceremony for him as well. Even though he hadn't played in a few years, he hadn't really made the decision to officially retire and hang him up, and he just did that not too long ago. But of course, what got Bieksa all up in arms was Zdeno Chara. Of course, those two went head to head in the 2011 Stanley Cup final. with the Boston Bruins ultimately winning the Cup in 7 games over the Vancouver Canucks. Chara went on a podcast and was telling a story about the 2011 Stanley Cup Final, saying how when the Canucks were in the Boston Garden, which I assume he was referring to Game 6, because at that point the Canucks, I believe, had the series lead, that they were, during the Canucks practice, that they were practicing how they were going to lift the cup and pass it to each other and things of that nature, and just kind of made it sound like they had jumped the gun and were really overconfident. And he said that they, now he's also walked his comments back. Chara went from saying that they seen it to that they heard it to that they heard it and believed it happened, and I really don't think that there's ever any proof. Now, Bieksa, again, we knew that he had heard about this through Elliotte Friedman and Jeff Merrick, who, of course, worked with him through Sportsnet, and they were talking to him via text privately and mentioned it in their recent podcast that came out the other day, and that he was going to address it on Hockey Night in Canada this evening, which he did, and essentially he said there's just no way that could ever happen, but he said he was very disappointed in Chara's comments, taking a shot at the character of the Canucks leadership, which he was certainly a part of, and there's also 3 first ballot Hall of Fame players on that team, including Luongo and Sedin's just going into the Hall of Fame here. So it's certainly, not something that he was very happy about. He's like, it's certainly not something they ever would have let happen on their watch, nearly, or participated in. And at the same time, he said it's ridiculous for him to even suggest that it was even possible to happen, given the fact that there's so much media coverage that are in the building and watching practices. There's no way the Vancouver Canucks could have even done this, or any team in that matter, in any cup final, without getting caught. A camera would have picked this up, and the reporter would have had a field day, either writing a story or doing a story on their network about it. Like, there's no way, because when these guys get paid for clicks and for ratings, and of course if they can find a juicy story, they're going to run with it. That's just what they do, and they would have done that exactly. So nothing was ever mentioned of it. So it just goes to show you that the truth behind it seems far-fetched at best, but at the same time, Chara's a well-respected guy. You wouldn't expect him to be going on any media platform, podcast, or news network of any sort, and telling stories that he couldn't even firsthand verify. That's the part that was shocking. Like Bieksa said, he's like, I'm disappointed because I know firsthand that Chara wouldn't have personally witnessed this, and at the same time, like I said, he's already walked back to comments saying that he went from we seen this to we heard about it to we believed it happened, and it kind of dates back, even think back way back to the Canada-USA women's Olympic team when Haley Wickenheiser stormed on the CBC News, or on the CBC broadcast during the intermission, talking about how the Americans were stomping on their flag, and they wanted to know if they wanted them to sign it now after winning the game. And it turns, because they were told during the intermission that the Americans had a Canadian flag on the floor and they were stomping on it and degrading it, and she was pissed, and I don't blame her. But at the same time, you might want to verify your story before you go on national TV or any kind of big media platform and, start spewing stuff like that. She'd later regret saying that, because she found out later that they were given wrong information and false information, and it never happened. So you got to be careful with those types of things for sure. And we'll see what more comes from it here. If there's any, further comments from Bieksa or Chara on this situation. Now, as I mentioned, the trade section of the video here for today, I want to discuss a possible trade between Montreal and Edmonton. There's been numerous reports from various reporters here that cover the Habs and the Oilers, suggesting that there's interest on a variety of players. So could we see a multi-player deal? Would this actually benefit both clubs? Would it work out? For example, I keep seeing reports of the Oilers being interested in Sean Monahan, and I've seen a lot of interest lately, according to different reports, on Joel Edmundson. Of course, Edmundson, a fairly big left shot defenseman. He's got a decent amount of experience, including playoff games. So I do understand the potential connection there. Same thing goes for Monahan, as the Oilers may want maybe like a number 3 center to increase their center depth for the playoffs. I understand the connection and the logic how they may have interest in those players. I haven't seen a rumor suggesting they're talking about making a big trade involving both guys, but I've seen enough individually here to connect the dots to both. Obviously, we've also seen Jesse Puljujarvi of the Oilers in the news recently. We know he's been in the rumor mill for a long time, and recently, saying that the Oilers have tried to trade him a lot. Never seems to work out. They don't get fair value. So Ken Holland has not pulled the trigger, but he recently made comments really doubting his future in the NHL and whether or not he's cut out for it, saying he doesn't know if he has a future at Edmonton or the NHL. And obviously that led many to think that maybe a fresh start is what he needs to give it another try somewhere else before he really makes that determination on a longer term basis. And this player has been linked to Montreal in the past as well. So obviously he's making $3 million. But if you take the contracts of Monahan as well as Edmonton, now of course Edmonton has another year on it, so this year and next, whereas Monahan's just the current year. They're almost $10 million combined. Montreal might be willing to retain money on Monahan. I doubt they would on Edmonton, because Monahan's over $6 million, whereas Edmonton's at 3.5, and with an extra year, they're probably not going to want money in their cap next year tied up. But at the same time, you probably have to include Puljujarvi going back the other way, which is a $3 million contract, and probably a guy like Tyson Barrie. Barrie's name has been mentioned out there enough times between Bouchard and Nurse, etc. Maybe they can afford to move a guy like Barrie to get a different type of defenseman, a big physical guy like Edmonton. Maybe that might work out. Now, there's been also a lot of linkage between the Habs and Oilers saying that Montreal had a keen interest in prospect Xavier Bourgault, of course, somebody who they could watch closely in the Quebec League before he turned pro. I have no doubt there'd be interest there because he is a good-looking prospect, but at the same time, I don't know the Oilers are going to want to make that move. That's a tough call, but certainly, a lot of interest there with a variety of pieces going back and forth. I mean, would we see a deal of Monahan and Edmonton going to the Oilers, maybe with a salary retained on Monahan in exchange for Puljujarvi or Bourgault, or a combination of, some kind of combination of Puljujarvi, Barrie, or Bourgault? I don't know if the Oilers would do that, to be honest. And now another trade the Oilers have been linked to that has been disputed here. Now, Darren Dreger was saying the Oilers were interested in Erik Karlsson, and there's been a lot of talk about what an Erik Karlsson to Edmonton trade might have to look like for it to be seriously considered or to work. And now Frank Saravalli of DailyFaceoff.com is disputing that rumor, saying that he's checked into it and that all his sources say that they're quite surprised to hear that. They don't believe the Oilers are really interested in Karlsson because it would be extremely, way too complicated, and there's just no way they could make it work. Given the fact that he makes a lot of money, San Jose may not want to retain half of the contract for the remainder of the term. They may not want to take Jesse Puljujarvi on, which would be required on Edmonton's side as well. And at the same time, it'd be really, really complicated, given the fact that they also have to extend Evan Bouchard here soon, and he's going to be due for a decent raise after getting through his entry-level deal. So that makes you wonder, if these two teams in Montreal and Edmonton could connect on a deal. It doesn't sound like the Oilers to the Karlsson deal is really all that serious or really all that verifiable, you could say, considering we have NHL insiders kind of, disputing each other's sources, so to speak. So to me, I think we could see a deal between the Montreal and Edmonton. I'm not sure it's going to look exactly the way we just discussed, but considering how many players have been rumored to be on each other's radar, you have to think that it is quite likely at some point that the two teams could hook up and get a deal done. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe. Stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.